Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. In this reflection on the 46th ayat of Surah Al-Anfal, we want to focus on some fundamental principles to guide the direction that we are moving in as a community. Surah Al-Anfal, in this regard, gives us an orientation, in particular this ayat, which, if practiced, we will find a sense of relief and a sense of community and an understanding of what success is and failure. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. قال المولى تبارك وتعالى وأطيعوا الله ورسوله ولا تنازعوا فتفشلوا وتذهب ريحكم واصبروا إن الله مع الصابرين. We have a number of different translations of the meaning of this ayat, or the meaning of this ayat, sorry. And they are as follows: and obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not dispute, and thus lose courage, and then your strength will depart. Be patient. Indeed, Allah is with the patient. And obey Allah and His Messenger, and dispute not with one another, lest you falter and your strength depart from you, but be steadfast. For indeed, Allah is with the steadfast. And obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not quarrel, for then you will be weak, consequentially, in heart, and your power will depart. And be patient. Surely, Allah is with the patient. In these various translations, and I modified a little bit as well, we find a number of different key themes. The issue of dispute, the issue of patience, the issue of strength. Dispute, patience, strength. What's constant is that it's very clear that what we're being commanded to in the initial portion of the ayat is to obey Allah and His Messenger. Right? Obedience then is preceded by understanding. Right? And that understanding is defined as having knowledge and practicing. Right? Understanding doesn't have to mean that we have a profound grasp in a philosophical way. But understanding means we know what's before us and we put it into practice. Something very universal and achievable by all. Because if we, in this case, define understanding fiqh as the comprehension of things which are complex, then we eliminate from the taklif, we eliminate from the obligation here a good many people, right? A good many people. Here, the taklif is something which is practical, practicable, and comprehensible by the vast majority. Allahu Alam. So that's the first issue. The issue of marji'iyah, the issue of orientation, direction, and guidance, right? Leadership. So where do we take our leadership from? We take our leadership from the guidance of the Quran and the Sunnah. In this case, the leadership is symbolic in the sense that we have to interpret the Quran and the Sunnah. We have to understand it in order to be able to practice it. So that's our process, right? Some of it is clear, some of it needs elaboration. Ideally, the leadership would be in the form of human beings that embody the principles of the Quran and the Sunnah and are mentoring the community, right? But we're in a position in which we're talking in a general sense without specifying that type of leadership. We're talking about the thought and moral and spiritual leadership provided by revelation itself, right? Revelation gives us principles to guide our thinking and the life of our hearts and our actions, right? And that's the meaning of deen as a whole. Deen as understood in the hadith of Jibreel is Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. And deen as a reality then speaks to the intellect of the human being, the heart of the human being, and demands physically from the human being action. So the body of the human being, the whole person, so to speak, the whole human being. And in order for the deen, if we go back to the ulama of usul, in order for the deen to be capable of being practiced on the part of a human being, it has to be something that's understood and something that can be effectuated, put into practice, right? Or else we have a taklif bil muhal, right? We have an obligation to do something which is impossible, and that's not the characteristic of the Islamic revelation, right? Or munat al-taklif, the center, right, of obligation begins with the intellect. There has to be some sense of reason, right? That's why we have sin al-tamayyuz, or we have the concept of tamiz, that when the child is of maturity and is able to differentiate between this and that, between some sense of identity differentiation. This is one thing and this is another thing, so to speak. So the beginning of taklif begins with maturity, right, of age, maturity of intellect, and maturity of body. So then the reality is that we don't have to understand with depth. We have to understand in principle, in general, right? That's the beginning. And as we grow, we come to a deeper understanding, right? So the Quran and the Sunnah then is obligating us at this point to refer our affairs to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. But here the obedience factor is what comes out, right? So obedience means action, by default. Obedience means action by default, right? Because here, right, it's what ati'u is a command to act, right? Obey Allah and His Messenger, right? Obey Allah and His Messenger. So Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, rahimahullah, he mentions that this ayah is addressed to who? To the believers. So what's implicit in the ayah is be obedient, O you believers. Be obedient to who? To your Rabb. To your Rabb. And to your Prophet, right? Or to the messenger or his messengers, I should say. In that which he commanded you and that which he prohibited you. And don't differ with these commands. The command to do and the command not to do, right? So again, the command to do and the command not to do, in order for us to be responsible, we have to be of sound mind, Muslim, in one opinion, and we have to what? We have to understand what's being asked of us. That's the first thing, right? Is to be aware and to have an understanding of the deen, what the deen is calling us to, right? What the deen is calling us to and what the deen is prohibiting us from. And then it says, وَلَا تَنَزَّعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا. Imam Ibn Jarir rahmatullahi alayhi rahmatan wasi'ah, he says, وَلَا تَخْتَلِفُوا فَتَفَرَّقُوا وَتَخْتَلِفْ قُلُوبُكُمْ فَتَفْشَلُوا. So in general, he is indicating that here, وَلَا تَنَزَّعُوا, don't dispute or fall into quarrels, right? It doesn't mean we're not going to debate ideas, but don't take it to the point where it's a quarrel where the hearts become divided. He mentions the issue of the heart because your hearts become divided, right? When you don't come to terms with one another, when there's a breakdown in understanding, right? When the communication breaks down between two parties, if there is tension there, there is a reality which manifests. And that reality which manifests on a psychological level is a sense of estrangement from one another. When communication takes place, there's communication that's taking place, right? There's a sense of community, right? Right. So there's a sense of coming together. So in this case, when there's division because of quarreling, we find that the hearts become divided, and then eventually it builds a culture. That culture that's built around that way of being, right? That's what I mean by culture. That way of being is how we deal with one another. Then is out of that experience of difference, right? So then he indicates that this state brings about weakness and the hardness of the heart and fear as well, right? And so then your courage and your capacity to act, your capacity to be effective, your capacity to implement, right? Your capacity to bring about, it goes away, right? Yeah, so here when we think back from some other tafsir, an example is made by referring to the winning party, so to speak, the winning party. And so when we think about one group that dominates in a soccer game, so to speak, eh, the group that dominates, the group that wins, right? They were able to what? To achieve a particular goal together as a unit. So then in the end, that victory is for them, right? So here, it, we can also use the example of a successful business, in comparison to an unsuccessful business. There's a sense of coordination, a sense of unison, a sense of effectiveness, right? Even to the point where we have books that are written on this, like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? There's always that search for how to be effective, not just as an individual, but also as a unit. So here the Quran is telling us first, then as a community, we have to obey Allah and His Messenger. So there has to be an implementation of the deen. It's not just a matter of confessing the shahada by tongue, but there has to be an implementation of the deen, right? And by implication, then there's mention that how we are to handle these situations, right, is by allowing the values of Islam to govern us, right? Allowing the values of Islam to govern us. So the consequence of deviating from unity, and it doesn't have to be a perfect unity, but it has to be a working unity, is weakness sets in, fear, and incapacity to act, right? It's just we're always fighting. This happens also within households. So then here, Allah wa ta'ala enjoins patience upon us and says that Allah is definitely with the patient. So the process then is one which needs work. The process of coming together, the process of trying to build community, trying to strengthen family. It's one that needs work. So the emphasis is there on patience. So that patience then requires something from ourselves, right? Requires a change within ourselves, right? Because if things are business as usual, there's no need, right, to what? There's no need to be patient. That patience comes when there's a challenging taking place of our very selves, right? So you have to be patient, right? You're acting, but you have to be patient to preserve that unity. So unity of the Muslim community demands patience, of course. Unity of a group demands patience. And that patience is tenacity, right? That patience is tenacity, steadfastness, as they say, right? That you're moving, with rhythm and commitment despite the bumps along the road, despite the challenges. So when we look at the energy that's being utilized in the Ummah to refute each other, right, we find that this energy is better utilized in other arenas. But unfortunately, what happens is when dissension and bitterness set in the heart and various degrees of hatred and dislike, we become people that have a difficulty in relating not only to one another but even accepting the other. Right? We become veiled. Our eyes become veiled. Our thought becomes veiled. Right? So that we become biased, and this can lead to injustice. So when we look at ulama, there are some ulama that have the ability, right, to work through the disputes, looking at the evidences and looking at the strong points. That's real scholarship in that sense, right? Real scholarship recognizes evidence. We have a saying in American English, real recognizes real. Right? Real recognizes real. So we look at the good in the other. And we have some groups which negate this principle of looking at the good in the other person. So then we ask, what happened to having husn al-dhan? What happened to having a good opinion with the others? This is one of the reasons why people like Imam al-Shawkani, rahimahullah, and others are very important, like Ibn Rushd, in formulating our thinking, in forming our attitude and character, and the way that we deal with ideas, right? Because they teach us how to look at the dalil, how to look at evidence, but as well they teach us how to reconcile between differences. And that's a big chapter in Usul al-Fiqh, reconciling differences, right? If there's intellectual incongruity, if there's intellectual dispute, if there is difference, right, irreconcilability at the level of ideas to the point where it affects our character, our akhlaq, and how we deal with one another, then forget it. The Quran is teaching us, that the end result of this is that your capacity to work together, your courage, your ability to be effective is gone. It's gone, period. And that's not from the characteristics of the believers. From the characteristics of the believers is that inna al-mu'minina ikhwa. It's not just that the believers are brothers, right? It's not just that the believers are friends, but the believers are what? Described as brothers. And brothers or brotherhood demands something much more than just friendship, right? It demands something much more than friendship. So we see the ulama who learn how to reconcile, right? Looking at the proofs and utilizing principles. These are the ulama that we need to bring to the forefront in our educational endeavors or journeys or careers, right? As we learn the deen, Because it's easy to start off our educational pursuit or our talib ilm, so to speak, in a small circle. But when we come to the problems of the ummah, right, we need to learn how to deal with them. So that's why we look at sciences like usul al-fiqh. That's why we look at sciences like the sciences of hadith and so on and so forth as a way to be able to utilize principles to negotiate the differences. And this is a task. It's a task. So Imam Shawkani rahimahullah, he served as a bridge, right, between the people of Kalam and the people of Hadith, right? He serves as a bridge to help us to learn how to reconcile. Ibn Jawzi was as well as like that. He served as a bridge, between various schools of thought. And some of the ulama are of that approach and others are not. All ulama are not of the same caliber and quality and orientation. So Allah Ta'ala, He warns us of this reality, especially differing in matters of the deen, in particular aqidah. So there has to be a way that we come to reconcile. The beginning point is to know that we have to come back to knowledge. And knowledge requires understanding. Understanding is knowing and action put together, right? And is what embellished by good character. Good character. Good character. So bringing the ummah together is an obligation from the Quran itself. وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَلَا تَنَزَّعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ وَاصْبِرُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ